The rain had been falling for 3 days without stopping. It made the cobblestones of the small market town shine like black glass. It made the horses slip. It made the poor even colder than they already were. But on the 4th day, the rain stopped, and a pale sun came out over the town of Wren's Hollow, and Petra Ashwood put on her plain grey cloak and walked to the market as she did every morning of her life. She was 23 years old. She had lived in the small stone cottage at the end of Miller's Lane for as long as she could remember. Her father had been a bookbinder, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers who had died when she was 17. Her mother had followed him within the year. Petra had learned to live alone. She had learned to make her own bread and mend her own dress and keep her own fire. She had learned that no one was coming to help her, and so she had stopped waiting. She carried a small basket over her arm. In it she had 3 eggs from her one hen, a bundle of dried herbs from her small garden, and a linen cloth wrapped around a loaf of bread she had baked at dawn. She meant to trade the eggs for a little salt, and the herbs for a piece of hard cheese. The bread was her own supper. She did not mean to trade that. The market square was slow to wake after the rain. The stalls were only half open. The awnings dripped. The air smelled of wet straw and horses, and the smoke from the baker's oven across the square. Petra breathed it in without thinking. It was the smell of her whole life. She walked past the pie seller and the tin peddler and the woman who sold ribbons, and she came to the corner near the church wall where the fishmonger set up his cart. She meant to turn there toward the salt merchant, but she stopped. There was a man lying against the church wall. He was not moving. His head was bent down on his chest. His legs were stretched out in front of him on the wet stones. His coat was dark with rain, so dark it was hard to tell what color it had once been. His boots were worn through at the toe. His hair was long and dark and fell over his face so that she could not see much of it. There was a bruise on his hand where it lay open on the stones beside him, and a thin cut on his brow that had bled and dried and bled again. Petra stood still for a long moment. She did not move closer at first. She had learned to be careful. A woman alone in a market town learned to be careful the way a bird learned to fly. It was not a thing she thought about. It was a thing she did. But she looked at him. She looked at the way his chest rose and fell, slow and steady. He was breathing. He was only sleeping. She looked at the bruise on his hand and the cut on his brow. She looked at the worn boots. She looked at the way his coat, though soaked and stained, was cut of good cloth underneath, not a beggar's cloth, but close enough that most eyes would pass over it. She looked around the square. There were people beginning to stir. The baker had come out to sweep his step. 2 boys were unloading barrels from a cart near the inn. A woman in a red shawl was arguing with the ribbon seller about the price of a piece of blue silk. No one was looking at the man against the church wall. No one had noticed him at all. Petra took one small step closer. She could smell him now. He smelled of rain and old wool and horse. He smelled faintly of something that was not any of those things. Something clean underneath. Like soap that had once been fine, or a room that had once been warm. She could not have named it, but she noticed it. She crouched down. She was careful to keep a little distance. She was careful not to touch him. "Sir," she said, quiet. He did not move. "Sir," she said again, a little louder. His chest rose and fell. His fingers twitched once, and then were still. She sat back on her heels. She looked at his face, or what she could see of it under the dark hair. She could see the line of a jaw. She could see the shadow of a beard that had not been shaved in perhaps 3 days. She could see the hollow under his cheekbone that meant he had not eaten in a while, or had been sick, or had walked a long way. She looked at his hand again, the one with the bruise. It was a large hand. The knuckles were scraped, but the nails were clean. That was a strange thing. A man who slept on a market square in the rain did not have clean nails. She noticed it, and then she filed it away, and then she did not think about it again for some hours. "I am going to leave you here," she said, very quiet, more to herself than to him. "But I will come back." She stood. She looked once more around the square. The two boys had finished with the barrels and were going into the inn. The baker had gone back inside. The woman in the red shawl had bought the blue silk and was walking away. Petra walked to the salt merchant. She traded her eggs. She got a small twist of paper with the salt inside and 1 copper penny in change, which she did not usually get, and which she took as a small mercy. She walked back across the square. She stopped by the baker's step and asked him, in a low voice, if he had seen the man by the church wall. The baker looked. He shrugged. He said he had not seen him come. He said men like that came and went, and it was best not to look too close. He said it kindly enough, but he said it as a man who had said it many times before. Petra thanked him. She walked back toward the church wall. The man had not moved. She set her basket down beside him, on the drier stone. She sat down on the church step, a little above him, so that she could see the whole square. She smoothed her cloak over her knees. She put her hands together in her lap. And she began to wait. She did not know why. Exactly. She could not have said, if anyone had asked her. She could have gone home. She could have made her tea and mended her stocking and read the one book she owned, the one that had belonged to her father, a battered volume of poetry with his name on the flyleaf. That was what she did most days. But she did not go home. She sat on the church step and she watched the man sleep, and she watched the square, and she thought, if I leave him, someone will come. Someone will see the good cloth under the wet coat. Someone will see the hand and think there might be a ring hidden somewhere, or a purse. Someone will do worse than take a purse. She had seen it before. 2 winters ago, an old drunkard had been found beaten half to death behind the tavern for the sake of 6 copper pennies. He had lived, but he had never walked right again. She had not forgotten. So she sat. The sun climbed higher. It was thin and pale, but it was warm enough to begin to dry the stones. Steam rose from the cobbles in soft white curls. A cart went by, its wheels making a wet, sucking sound in the mud at the edge of the square. A dog barked somewhere behind the inn. The man against the wall breathed on, slow and steady. An hour passed. A boy came by, perhaps 12 years old, in a coat too big for him. He slowed when he saw the sleeping man. His eyes went to the hand on the stones. Petra saw him look. She did not move at first. She only watched him. The boy took 1 step closer. Petra stood up. She did not say anything. She only stood, and she moved so that she was between the boy and the man, and she looked at the boy with her face very still. The boy stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the sleeping man. He looked at her again. Then he shrugged, as if he had only been passing, and he walked on. Petra sat back down on the step. Her hands were shaking a little. She pressed them flat against her knees until they stopped. She was not brave. She wanted to be clear about that, at least with herself. She was not one of those women in the old ballads who fought bandits with their bare hands. She was tired and cold, and she wanted her tea. But she had made a small promise to a sleeping stranger, and she had not been in the habit, these last 6 years since her parents died, of breaking her own promises. It was one of the few things she had left. So she sat. More time passed. The bells of the church above her rang the hour, 11 times. The sound went into her chest, and into her hands, and into the stones. The man against the wall stirred. It was only a small movement. His head turned a little. His breath caught, and then evened again. But he did not wake. Petra leaned forward. "Sir," she said again, quiet, "you are getting cold. You should not sleep out here." He did not answer. She sat back. At noon the market began to close up. The stalls came down. The awnings were rolled. The baker put out his last loaves at half price, and a woman with 3 children bought them all. The square emptied slowly. A man came out of the inn. He was tall and thin, and he had a red nose from drink. He crossed the square with a purpose that was not quite steady. He was heading for the tavern on the far side. But halfway across, he saw the sleeping man. He stopped. He looked, And Petra saw the look. It was not the boy's look. The boy had been curious and hungry. This man was calculating. He came closer. Petra stood. The man stopped a little way off. He looked at her. He looked at the sleeping stranger. He looked at her again. "Yours?" he said. She did not know what to say to that. "He belongs to no one," she said after a moment. "But I am watching him." The drunk man laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Watching him," he said, "like a hen watches an egg." "What do you want with him?" "Nothing," she said. "Then step aside." "No," she said. Her voice was quiet. It did not shake, which surprised her. Something inside her chest was very still. The drunk man took a step forward. Petra did not step back. She looked him in the face. She was not tall. She was not strong. But she had lived alone for 6 years, and she had learned that certain men would push a door if it moved, and would not push it if it did not. The door did not move. He stood there a moment. Then he spat on the stones, not at her, just to the side, and he turned and walked on toward the tavern. Petra breathed out slowly. Her hands were shaking again. She sat down harder than she meant to on the church step. The man against the wall had not woken. That, she thought, was a small blessing. She did not want to think what she would have done if he had woken now, cold and confused, with a drunk shouting at him. She looked down at him. She thought, for the first time, that perhaps she should go for help. But there was no one in Wren's Hollow to go to. The magistrate was 3 miles off and would not come for a beggar. The constable was old and slow and would only tell her to move on. The vicar was kind but away visiting his sister. She had no one to fetch, and she was not going to leave the man alone. So she stayed. The afternoon went on. The sun moved. Her shadow grew long across the stones. Her stomach reminded her that she had not eaten since dawn. She thought about the loaf of bread in her basket. She thought about it for a long time. Then she unwrapped it. She broke it in half. She wrapped one half back in the linen cloth. She held the other half in her lap. She did not eat yet. She looked down at the sleeping man. "When you wake," she said to him, "quiet. There will be bread." He did not answer. He only breathed. She ate her half slowly. It was still a little soft in the middle from the morning. It tasted of flour and salt and the faint smoke of her small oven. She chewed each bite for a long time. She listened to the sounds of the square emptying around her. She listened to the dog barking behind the inn. She listened to the church bell ring the quarter. She thought, for a moment, of her mother. Her mother had been a small woman with strong hands. She had taken in mending. She had taught Petra how to knot a thread so it would not slip. She had taught her how to talk to a horse and how to hold a needle and how to say no to a man without raising her voice. She had died in the winter of Petra's 18th year, of a cough that would not leave her chest. Petra had held her hand at the end. Her mother had said, very quietly, close to sleep, that Petra should not marry unless she found a man who was kind to servants and to animals when he thought no one was looking. That was the whole of the advice she had given. Then she had closed her eyes and not opened them again. Petra had never forgotten it. She finished the last of the bread. She wiped her hand on her cloak. She looked down at the sleeping stranger and she thought, without meaning to, about her mother's words. She did not know why. He was not a suitor. He was not anything to her. He was a man on the stones with a cut on his brow and clean nails and a coat that had once been better than it was now. But she thought of the words anyway. The bells rang 3. The stranger stirred. This time he did more than turn his head. He drew in a long breath. His fingers curled and uncurled. His shoulders shifted against the wall. And then, slowly, as if from a very great distance, he opened his eyes. They were dark. That was the first thing she saw, dark as wet earth. They did not focus at first. They looked up at the sky, and then at the wall across the square, and then at last, at her. He did not speak. She did not either. He blinked, slow. He seemed to be trying to place her. She did not know what he was seeing. A woman in a grey cloak, sitting on a church step, with her basket beside her and a piece of bread wrapped in linen in her lap. Perhaps that was all. Perhaps he had never seen her before, and could not have known that she had sat there for 4 hours. "Water," he said. His voice was low and rough. It was the voice of a man who had not spoken in a while and had not drunk in longer. Petra stood at once. There was a well at the corner of the square. She had a small tin cup in her basket, which she had meant to trade if she needed to and had not. She took it out. She walked to the well. She drew water. She walked back. She knelt down beside him, not touching him. She held the cup out. He tried to lift his hand. It shook. She saw it shake. She saw him see her see it. Something moved in his face, not shame exactly, but something close to it, quickly hidden. She held the cup steady. She did not lift it to his mouth. She waited. He got his hand around it. He drank slow. Half of it went into his mouth and half went down his chin. He did not seem to notice. When he had finished, he let the cup down onto the stones beside him, careful, as if it was something that could break. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She reached into her lap and picked up the wrapped bread. She held it out. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something in his face changed again. He did not take it at first. "It is only bread," she said. He took it. He ate slowly. He tore small pieces. He chewed each piece for a long time. She thought that perhaps he had been taught to eat this way, once, long ago. Not the way a starving man ate, but the way a boy in a schoolroom might have been made to eat. It struck her as an odd thought, and she put it aside. When he had finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked up at her. "How long have you been here?" he said. "A while," she said. "How long?" She did not want to answer. It seemed to her that if she said the true number, 4 hours or nearly, it would sound like she wanted something in return. "A few hours," she said. He was quiet. He looked around the square. He seemed to be taking in where he was. He seemed to be remembering, in pieces. "Why?" he said. She did not answer at once. She looked down at her hands. Then she looked up at him, and she said the truth, because she had never been very good at anything else. Because if I had left, someone would have come. A boy came already. A drunk man came already. I did not want them to find you sleeping. He stared at her. There was a long silence. She could hear the church bell above them ticking. She could hear the far-off bark of the dog. She could smell the drying stones and the wet wool of his coat and the faint, clean thing underneath. "You stood guard over me," he said. "Quiet." "I sat," she said. "I did not stand for most of it." The corner of his mouth moved. It was very small. It might have been a smile, if he had been well enough for one. "Sat guard, then," he said. "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were clearer than they had been. "What is your name?" he said. "Petra Ashwood." He said it once, quiet, to himself. Petra Ashwood, as if he were putting it away somewhere. "And yours?" she said. He hesitated. It was the smallest hesitation. Another woman might not have caught it. Petra caught it. She had spent 6 years alone, and she had learned to notice the small silences between what a person said and what a person meant. "Rowan," he said. "Rowan Vele." "Mr. Vele," she said. He almost smiled again. "Yes," he said. "That will do." She did not know what he meant by that. She let it pass. "Can you stand?" she said. He looked down at his legs. He seemed to consider them. "I do not know," he said. "Honest." "Try." He tried. He got one hand against the wall. He pushed. His knees shook. He stood. He stood for perhaps 3 heartbeats, and then his knees gave, and he sat back down again, harder than he meant to. He did not curse. He only breathed. Petra did not laugh. She did not fuss. She only nodded, as if it were a piece of information she had been waiting for. "You will come with me," she said. He looked at her. "My cottage is not far," she said. "There is a fire. There is dry cloth. There is broth. You cannot stay here another night. It will rain again by dusk. You do not know me, he said. No, she said. I could be anyone. You could, she said. But you are not going to be anyone bad in my kitchen, or you would have been bad already, in the 4 hours you were asleep, and I would have known it. He looked at her for a long moment. Miss Ashwood, he said. Yes, you are a strange woman. So I have been told. The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it was almost a real smile. She did not quite know what to do with it. She looked away. She helped him stand. It took a long time. She got her shoulder under his arm, carefully, because he was much taller than she was, and because she did not want him to feel he was leaning on her more than he could bear. He weighed less than she had expected. He was thin under the wet coat. She thought again of the words. He had walked a long way. They went slowly. The stones were still damp. Twice he had to stop and lean against a wall. She did not hurry him. She only kept her shoulder where he could use it. They passed the baker's window. The baker looked out. His eyebrows went up. He did not say anything. Petra nodded to him. The baker nodded back. That was how news travelled in Wren's Hollow. It did not need to be spoken. They went down Miller's Lane. Her cottage was the last one, a low stone building with a thatched roof that needed patching in one corner and a green door that her father had painted the year before he died. The paint had faded. It was still green enough. She unlatched the door. She helped him over the step. Inside, the cottage was one room with a loft up a ladder for sleeping. There was a hearth on the far wall, with a black kettle hanging over the ashes of the morning's fire. There was a small table with 2 chairs. There was a settle by the fire, low and old, with a folded blanket on it. There was a shelf with 3 books and a jar of dried lavender. There was nothing else, and it was clean. She helped him to the settle. He sat. Careful. She built the fire back up. She did not speak while she did it. She raked the ashes. She laid the kindling. She struck the flint. She blew on the small flame until it caught. She fed it larger sticks. She hung the kettle back over. She moved with the calm quickness of a woman who had done this thousands of times. He watched her. She felt him watching. She did not turn. You have done this a long time, he said. Since I was small, she said. Alone? For 6 years, alone, he did not answer. She heard him settle further into the settle. She heard the slow scrape of his boot on the stone floor. She heard the crackle of the fire beginning to take. She put on broth. She had a little in a covered crock, a thin broth of onion and barley and a bit of bacon rind, made from the bone of last week's chicken. It was not fine. It was hot, and it was hers, and it would do him good. She warmed it. She poured it into her one good bowl. She brought it to him with a spoon. He took the bowl in both hands. He looked at it for a moment, the way he had looked at the bread. Then he lifted the spoon and he ate. He did not speak while he ate. Neither did she. She sat on the second chair, near the fire, with her hands in her lap. She watched him without staring. She watched the way he held the spoon. It was not the way a laborer held a spoon. It was not the way a beggar held a spoon. It was the way a man held a spoon who had been taught, once, that a spoon was to be held a certain way, and had never quite forgotten. She noticed. She did not say. When he had finished, he set the bowl down on the settle beside him. He leaned his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes. Miss Ashwood, he said. Yes, I am very tired. I know, she said. Sleep, the fire will hold. He did not answer. He was already gone. She sat there a while longer. She watched him sleep. His face, in the firelight, looked younger than she had thought. She could see the whole of it now, without the wet hair falling over it. There was a small scar at the corner of his mouth, thin and old. There was a shape to his jaw that was not the shape of a poor man's jaw. She looked at him for a long time, and she thought about it, and then she stood up and she went about her evening, because thinking would not fill a kettle. She washed the bowl. She fed the fire. She mended a small tear in her stocking by the light of one candle. When the candle burned low, she banked the fire and took another blanket from the wooden chest by the door and covered him with it. He did not stir. She climbed the ladder to the loft. She lay down in her narrow bed. She listened to the rain begin again, soft on the thatch above her. She listened to the breathing of the stranger in her one room below. She did not sleep for a long time. When she did sleep, she did not dream. He was still there in the morning. She had half expected him to be gone. She had thought he might rise in the night and slip out, leaving her hearth cold and her door open. It would not have surprised her. She was not owed anything by anyone. But he was still there. He was sitting up on the settle, with the blanket around his shoulders, and he had built the fire back up. He had done it neatly. He had swept the hearth. The kettle was already on. He looked up when she came down the ladder. "Good morning, Miss Ashwood," he said. "Good morning, Miss Vale." She noticed her voice was steady. She was pleased with that. She went to the water bucket by the door and washed her face. She twisted her hair back and pinned it. She put on her apron. She did all of this without looking at him, and he did not watch her. He looked at the fire. He gave her the small courtesy of not watching. She noticed that too. "You built up the fire," she said. "Yes, you should not have. You were half dead yesterday." "I am less than half dead today," he said. She almost smiled. She turned to the hearth so he would not see. They ate porridge together. There was not much of it, but there was enough. He ate slowly again. She ate quickly, because she always had. When they had finished, he set his bowl down and he said, "Quiet. I owe you a great debt, Miss Ashwood. You owe me nothing." "That is not true." "It is what I would like it to be," she said. "I did not do it to be owed." He was quiet a moment. "Why did you do it then?" he said. She thought about the answer. She thought about her mother's words, about servants and animals and men who were kind when they thought no one was looking. She thought about the drunk in the square. She thought about the boy. She thought about the cold stones and the cut on his brow. "I did not want you to be robbed," she said. "That is all." He looked at her a long time. "That is not all," he said. She did not answer. He did not push. He stayed 3 days. That was longer than she had meant. She had thought perhaps 1 night, perhaps 2, but on the second morning he had tried to leave, and his knees had gone out from under him halfway to the door, and she had made him sit down and had said, in a voice that was quiet but was not a voice you argued with, that he would stay until he could walk out of her door under his own strength, and not 1 day less. He had not argued. He had only nodded, slow, as if he were being given something he had not known how to ask for. In those 3 days he was quiet. He was not a talker. But he was not sullen either. He was careful with her. He was careful with her house. He asked before he touched a book on her shelf. He asked before he fetched water from the well at the end of the lane. He asked on the second afternoon if he might mend the loose stone in her hearth, which she had been meaning to see to for a year. She said yes, and he did it, working slowly because his hand still shook, and when he had finished the stone was better set than it had been in her father's time. She noticed things about him. She noticed that he did not know the price of anything. When she sent him with a penny to buy salt from the merchant, he came back with 3 times what a penny should buy. Because he had said keep the change without thinking, and the merchant had given him what a penny actually bought and no more, and had told her later, laughing a little, that her cousin had strange manners. She did not correct the merchant. She only nodded. She noticed that he sat down carefully in a chair, as if he were used to chairs that did not creak, and hers all creaked. She noticed that when a servant girl from the vicarage came by with a message on the second afternoon, the vicar's sister was ill, he would be away another week. Rowan Vale had stood, out of habit when the girl came in, and had said thank you to her when she left, and the girl had turned quite pink, and had almost curtsied, and had walked away in confusion. She noticed that he watched her when he thought she was not looking. Not the way the drunk in the square had watched her. Something else, something that was closer to thinking than to wanting, as if he were trying to understand what kind of thing she was. She let him watch. She had nothing to hide. On the third night, the rain came heavy again. It beat on the thatch. It made the fire spit when a drop found the chimney. He sat on the settle, and she sat in her father's old chair by the hearth, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "Miss Ashwood," he said at last. "Yes, I must tell you something." "All right." He looked at the fire. He did not look at her. She was grateful for that. She thought it would be easier for both of them if he did not. "My name is not Rowan Vale," he said. She was quiet a moment. "I thought perhaps it was not," she said. His head turned then. He looked at her. "You thought? You paused before you said it," she said. "And your hands are the wrong hands for the name." He stared at her. "The wrong hands," he said. "You have never done a day's rough work with them," she said. "Not properly. Your palms are soft under the calluses." "The calluses are new. They are from riding, I think, not from a plough." He looked down at his own hands, as if he were seeing them for the first time. "You have been watching," he said. "A little." He was quiet. "I did not lie to steal from you," he said, after a while. "I lied because I did not know who you were, and I have learned not to give my true name to people I do not know." "You still do not know me," she said. "That is not true either." She did not answer. He drew a breath. He set his hands on his knees. She saw that they were not shaking now, which was something. "My name," he said, "is Dorian Hale." She did not know the name. "I am the 7th Duke of Thornwick." She did know that name. Every soul in the county knew that name. Thornwick Hall was 10 miles to the north, on the ridge above the river. It was the largest house in 3 counties. The Duke of Thornwick owned most of the land she could see from the top of the hill above her cottage. He owned the mill her father had once used. He owned the road that ran through the town. He owned, in some way or other, most of the lives around her. Though she had never seen him, and had never expected to, she sat very still. She did not know what her face was doing. She hoped it was not doing anything. It was one of the things her mother had taught her. When a shock came, keep the face still until you know what you think. "I see," she said. That was all she said. He waited. She thought perhaps he had expected her to stand up, or to curtsy, or to apologize, or to laugh, or to weep. He got none of it. "Miss Ashwood," he said. "Careful. Yes, you are not going to say anything?" "I am thinking," she said. He nodded slow. He waited. She thought. She thought about a man who had lain in the rain on a market square with a cut on his brow. She thought about a man who had eaten her bread and drunk her water, and slept under her mother's old blanket. She thought about a man who had mended her hearthstone and said thank you to a servant girl. She thought about the way he had said keep the change to the salt merchant without knowing what a penny bought. She thought about her mother's words. Then she thought about herself, about her plain grey cloak, and her thin fingers, and her one green door, about the fact that a duke had sat in her father's chair and eaten from her bowl, and would now walk out of her door and go back to Thornwick Hall, and this would be a story she would tell no one, because no one would believe her. "Why did you not say?" she said, at last. "I meant to, this morning. And then yesterday. And then when I first woke. But I did not want you to change," he said, "when you knew." She looked at him then, really looked. "You thought I would change." "Everyone changes," he said. "Everyone." His voice was flat when he said it. It was the flat voice of a man who had learned something the hard way and had not forgotten it. She heard the whole of his life in it, or she heard a piece large enough to guess at the rest. "I would not have changed," she said. "No," he said. "I know that now." They sat a long time in the firelight. "How did you come to be there?" she said, at last, on the church wall. He rubbed his hand across his face. "I was riding back from Ellsworth," he said. "There is a matter of land there that required me. I sent my men ahead. I wanted an hour alone. I wanted to see my own country without a company of servants at my heels. I have done this before. It has never gone wrong before. But it went wrong. My horse threw me on the ridge road. I hit my head. I do not remember most of the walk. I do not remember coming into the town. I remember sitting down against the wall to rest for a moment. I do not remember closing my eyes. Your men will be looking for you. They will, he said. They may already be at the hall tearing the country apart. You should send word. I should, he said. I will tomorrow. I did not want to send word yet. Why not? He looked at her. Because tomorrow, he said, is soon enough for the world to know where I am. He said it quiet. He said it without pressing anything. But she felt the words settle in the room the way the heat of the fire settled, steady, and without asking for a thing in return. She looked at her hands. Your Grace, she said. No, that is what you are. That is what I am to everyone but you, he said. Please, not from you, not tonight. She did not say the name. She did not say any name. She stood up. You should sleep, she said. You have another day of walking to do, before you can do it well. Miss Ashwood. Yes. Thank you. For the bread? For the stones? She did not understand at first. Then she did. She thought of a woman in a grey cloak sitting on a church step for 4 hours, with her hands in her lap, watching a boy and a drunk pass by. You are welcome, she said, quiet, and she climbed the ladder to her loft. She lay in her narrow bed a long time, and she thought about a great many things. She thought about the fact that when she came down in the morning, he would be a duke again. He would speak differently. He would look at her differently. She would look at him differently, no matter how hard she tried not to. That was the way of the world. She had not made it. She thought about the fact that in a few days he would be gone. She was surprised to find that she did not want him to be gone. She was more surprised to find that she was not going to say so. She turned her face to the wall, and she closed her eyes. In the morning he was still there, and he was standing, and he was steady on his feet. He had built the fire. He had put the kettle on. He had swept the floor with her small broom. He had done all of it before she came down the ladder, and he had done it, she saw, because he wanted her to see that he could. Good morning, he said. Good morning. I will go today. I know. They ate porridge again. It was the last of her oats. She did not mention that. He watched her eat. She felt him watching. This time she did not look away. She looked back. Your Grace, she said. He winced. Miss Ashwood. You cannot ask me to call you nothing. I do not know how to call a duke nothing. He set his spoon down. Then call me by the name I gave you first, he said. Rowan. It is my second name, in truth. It was my mother's father's. She used it for me when I was very small. No one else ever has. She looked at him. That is not fair to me, she said. How not? Because it is a gift, and I did not do any of this for a gift. I know that, he said. That is why it is yours. She was quiet. Rowan, then, she said, finally. Quiet. In this house. Not outside. In this house, he said. That will do. He stood. He went to the door. He put on the coat that had dried by the fire over the last 3 days. It was still stained, but it was dry, and in the morning light she could see, now that she knew to look, the fine cut of it, the small silver thread of a crest inside the collar where the lining showed. He turned in the doorway. I will send someone for the coat, he said. It is not fit to wear like this. I only need to reach the crossroads. I know. I will send other things too. Please do not. He stopped. Miss Ashwood, please do not send me anything. Not gold. Not gifts. Not a new dress. If you send those things, then I will have watched you for a price. And I did not. He was quiet a long moment. May I send anything? She thought. You may send a book if you like, she said. One book. Not a fine one. A book you have read yourself, and thought I might like. He looked at her. One book, he said. Yes, that is all. That is all. He nodded slow. He looked around the small room one more time. His eyes went to the hearthstone he had mended, to the settle, to her father's chair, to the shelf with the 3 books and the lavender jar, to her, standing by the table with her hands folded in her apron. Miss Ashwood. Yes, you stood guard over a sleeping beggar, so no one would rob him. Yes, you did not know he was a duke. No, that is what I will remember, he said. Not the bread, not the broth. That, he opened the door. He went out. He closed the door behind him. She stood a long moment in her kitchen. Then she went about her day. She did not weep. She had not been a woman who wept easily since her mother died. She had learned to keep her small griefs to herself. She had learned that a woman who wept alone was only wetter than she had been before. But she thought about him all day. She thought about him while she fed the hen. She thought about him while she swept the step. She thought about him while she carried water. She thought about the way he had said that is what I will remember, and she thought that if she had ever heard a truer sentence she could not remember when. A week passed. Then, too, at the end of the second week, a boy came down Miller's Lane on a fine bay pony. He wore the livery of a great house, dark blue with silver at the cuffs. He knocked at her green door, and when she opened it, he held out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of plain string. For Miss Petra Ashwood, he said, with no message. Thank you, she said. She took it inside. She sat down at the table. She untied the string. Inside the paper was one book. It was not new. It was a small volume of poems. The leather cover was worn at the corners in the way that a book was worn when it had been read many times. The gilt on the spine was rubbed thin. When she opened it, she saw that there were small marks in the margin, in a firm, careful hand. A line here, a word underlined there. The book had been read, and read carefully, by someone who had thought about it. She turned to the flyleaf. There was no note. There was no name. There was only, in the same firm hand, one word, written very small in the bottom corner. Rowan. She held the book a long time. Then she closed it, and she set it on her shelf next to her father's poetry, and she went to feed the hen. 3 more weeks passed. Life went on. The rain stopped. The summer came in slowly. Her small garden gave her lettuces and beans. She traded the beans for a piece of ham. She read the book in the evenings. She read it slowly. She read the marked passages twice. She did not walk to Thornwick Hall. She never once thought of walking to Thornwick Hall. It was 10 miles, and she had no reason, and she did not want to be the kind of woman who thought she had a reason. But she thought about him. She thought about him on the 4th Sunday, when she walked to the church for the service, and she passed the church wall where he had slept, and she stopped for just a moment and put her hand flat against the stone, and then walked on. She thought about him on the day she found a lame kitten in the lane, and she took it in, and she fed it milk with a rag, and it lived. And it slept on her hearth, and she named it nothing at all for 2 weeks, and then, one evening, without meaning to, she said, "Come here," Rowan to it, and it did, and she laughed at herself for the first time in a long time. She thought about him on the day the news came. The news came from the vicar, back at last from his sister's sickbed, sitting at her table with a cup of her tea in his hands. The vicar was a small round man who liked news the way some men liked drink. "Have you heard?" he said. "About what?" "The Duke." "Our Duke. Thornwick." She did not answer at once. "What of him?" she said. "They say he was thrown from his horse a month ago, some way off. They say he went missing for 4 days. They say his men were mad with searching. They say he came back on foot into the courtyard with a beggar's coat over his shoulders, and said only that he had been well cared for, and would not say by whom. There is a great deal of talk about it. The staff cannot get a word from him. They say he has been quiet ever since, quieter than usual, and he was never a chattering man." "That is a strange story," she said. "Careful, very strange," said the vicar. "But there is more." "More?" "He has been asking, this last week, about a woman in Wren's Hollow. Quietly, through the steward. No one knows quite who he means. The steward has been going about the town asking after any woman named Ashwood." The vicar paused and looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I told him I knew one." She set her own cup down. Her hand was steady. She was pleased about that. "Did you?" she said. "I did," said the vicar. "I hope you are not angry with me." I am not. I did not tell him anything else. There is nothing else to tell. The vicar smiled a small smile. He did not press. He was a kind man, the vicar. He was one of the reasons she went to the church. He left. She washed the cups. She sat down in her father's chair. The kitten she had almost named Rowan climbed into her lap, and she rested her hand on its warm back, and she looked into the fire for a long time. She did not know what she felt. She did not know if she wanted him to come. She did know that if he came, she would open the door. She did not know if that was the same thing. 2 days later, she was sweeping her step in the late afternoon when she saw the horseman coming down Miller's Lane. It was not a boy this time. It was a man. He rode a large grey horse. He wore a plain dark coat, well cut but not ostentatious, and his hair had been trimmed since she had last seen him, and there was no cut on his brow, though there was still, she saw, a thin line of a scar where the cut had been. She stood still on her step, with the broom in her hand. He drew rein at her small gate. He dismounted. He tied the horse to the post. He walked up the path. He stopped at the step below her, so that they were of a height. "Miss Ashwood," he said. "Your Grace," she said. He winced. "Small in this house," he said. "You promised." "You are not in the house yet," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He came in. She closed the door behind him. The kitten came out from under the settle, cautious, and then, seeing him, walked straight to him and butted its head against his boot. He looked down at it. "That was not here before," he said. "No. Yours?" "Yes. Does it have a name?" She could not help the small smile that came to her mouth. "Not yet," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. She did not offer him her father's chair. She sat down in it. He remained standing. He turned his hat in his hands slow. She had never seen him look uncertain before. She thought about it for a moment. She had not been sure a duke could look uncertain. Apparently they could, in her kitchen. "You look well," she said. "I am well. Your steward has been asking after me." "Yes, the whole town knows." "I know," he said. "I did not do it well. I did not know how to do it at all. You could have written. I did not know if you would open the letter." She thought about that. "I would have opened it," she said. "I did not know." He turned the hat again in his hands. "Miss Ashwood," he said. "Yes, I have thought about the church wall every day for a month." She did not answer. "I have thought about the 4 hours you sat on the step. I have thought about the boy you turned away and the drunk you turned away. I have thought about the fact that you did not touch me while I slept, and did not look through my coat, and did not leave when the market closed. I have thought about the bread you shared, and the water you brought, and the broth you gave me from your one crock. Rowan, please let me say this. I have practiced it many times, and I will forget it if you stop me." She was quiet. "I have known women all my life," he said, "who would have looked at me on that wall and seen only what I was wearing. I have known women who would have looked at me at the hall and seen only what I owned. I have never in my life met a woman who looked at me when I was neither, and did not care which I was, and did what she did anyway." He drew a breath. "I am not here to offer you money. I know you will not take money. I am not here to offer you a fine dress, or a house, or a place at the hall. I am not here to offer you rescue. You do not need rescue. You have been rescuing yourself for 6 years. I am here because in 1 month I have not been able to sit down at any table, in any room, in any house I own, without thinking about the way you set a spoon down beside a bowl." He looked at her. "I am here to ask," he said, "if I may come again. Not with gifts, not with promises. Only to sit in your kitchen. Only that." She looked at him for a long time. The fire crackled. The kitten wound itself around his boots. Outside, a bird was singing somewhere on Miller's Lane, some small evening bird she could not name. She thought about her mother. She thought about servants and animals, and men who were kind when no one was looking. She thought about a hearthstone that had been mended. She thought about a book with one word in the flyleaf. She thought about herself, about the woman she had been at 17 when her father died, and at 18 when her mother died, and at 23 when she had sat down on a church step and had not left. "Rowan," she said. "Quiet. Yes, I will not be a mistress. And I will not be a wife bought with pity. If you come here, you come as you did before, as a man in my kitchen, nothing more and nothing less, and we will see what grows in it." He set his hat down slowly on her table. "That is what I hoped you would say," he said. She stood up. She held out her hand. He looked at it a moment. Then he took it. His hand was warm and steady. Hers was steady too. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The fire spoke in the hearth. The kitten purred. The evening light came in through the small window and fell across the mended hearthstone. "Sit," she said. "I will put on the kettle." He sat. She put on the kettle. She did not know then what would come. She did not know that within the year the vicar of Wren's Hollow would read the banns of Petra Ashwood and Dorian Hale, 7th Duke of Thornwick, in the small church on the square, on 3 Sundays in a row, and that on the 4th Sunday the small church would be full of people who had known her all her life and had never once known she was going to marry a duke. She did not know that the wedding would be held there in Wren's Hollow and not at the hall, because she had asked, and he had said yes without a moment's thought. She did not know that on the morning of the wedding the baker would bring her a loaf of bread and would refuse to be paid, and that the salt merchant would shake her hand for a very long time and would not look her in the face, because he was trying not to weep, and that the vicar, who had once told her news about a duke in her kitchen, would put her hand into a duke's hand and would say the words steady and clear. She did not know that in the 2nd year of their marriage, on a wet afternoon in the market town, they would pass the church wall together, and she would stop, and he would stop with her, and neither of them would say anything, and they would only stand there a moment with her hand in the crook of his arm, and then walk on. She did not know that on their 3rd winter the vicar's sister, still ill, would come to stay at the hall through the cold months, and that Petra herself would nurse her in the west parlour with the good fire, and that when the vicar tried to thank her, Dorian would only look at Petra and say, quiet enough that only the vicar heard him, "She has been doing this since she was small." She did not know that a housemaid at the hall would tell her, one afternoon over the mending, that during the 4 days he had been missing, the Duke had walked into the courtyard on foot and had gone straight past his own steward without a word to him, and up the great stairs, and had sat alone in his study for 3 hours before he would speak to anyone at all, and had come out only to give one order, that no one on the estate was ever to be turned away from the kitchens if they came asking for bread, that the order was to stand until the end of his life, that it had not been rescinded, that it never would be. She did not know then that she would learn about that order not from him, but from the maid, and that when she thought about it later, alone in the garden with a cup of tea in her hand, she would understand that he had done it before he ever knew her name, before he ever knew if he would find her, before he knew whether she wanted to be found. He had done it because a woman he did not know had shared her bread with him. He had done it because he had understood, in one small kitchen, what a loaf of bread could mean. He had done it privately. He had done it without mentioning it. He had done it because it was the true thing to do, and not because he thought anyone would ever tell her. She did not know then, standing in her small cottage with the kettle beginning to sing, any of these things. She only knew that a man was sitting in her father's chair, and she was going to make him tea. And she was going to sit down across from him, and they were going to see what grew. The kettle came to the boil. She lifted it off the hook. She poured the water into the small brown pot. She set the pot down on the table between them. She sat down. He looked at her across the steam. "Miss Ashwood," he said. "Petra," she said. He drew in his breath. "Petra, yes." He did not say anything for a long moment. He only looked at her. The evening light through the window caught the side of his face. She could see the thin line of the scar at his brow. She could see the shape of his jaw. She could see, in his eyes, that he was not looking at her the way the drunk had looked at her, and not the way the boy had looked at her, and not the way any man had ever looked at her before. He was looking at her the way a person looks at a fire in a cold room. She poured the tea. She pushed the cup toward him. Their fingers touched on the handle for the smallest moment. Neither of them pulled back. Neither of them made anything of it. She lifted her own cup. She held it in both hands. She breathed in the steam. Outside, a small evening bird sang. The kitten climbed into her lap. The mended hearthstone glowed in the firelight. She had stood guard over a sleeping beggar on a wet market square, so that no one would rob him. She had not known he was a duke. She had sat there for 4 hours in the cold, on a church step, with her hands in her lap, watching a boy and a drunk pass by. She had shared her bread. She had given her water. She had brought him home. She had done all of it because a man on a stone was still a man, and because her mother had once told her, close to dying, that a person's true measure was how they behaved when they thought no one was looking. She had not known she was being looked at. He had. She lifted her cup. She looked at him over the rim. "Rowan," she said. "Yes, drink your tea." He drank his tea. The evening came down slow over Miller's Lane. The fire burned steady. The kettle cooled. Somewhere in the town the church bell rang the hour, and its sound rolled out over the small stone cottages and the wet lanes and the green fields beyond, and passed on out over the ridge road, and out over the far woods, and out toward Thornwick Hall, standing on its hill above the river. But the man who owned the hall was not in it. He was in a small kitchen at the end of Miller's Lane, in the last cottage before the fields, with a cup of tea in his hand and a woman across the table from him, and he was, for the first time in as long as he could remember, in no hurry at all to be anywhere else. She reached across the table without meaning to. She set her hand flat on the wood, palm up. She did not look at it. She did not look at him. After a moment, she felt his hand cover hers. His palm was warm. His fingers were long. The calluses she had noticed a month ago, the new ones from riding, were still there. They were a little worn now. He had been riding a great deal. She had a small thought about why, and she put it aside. He did not say anything. She did not either. The fire spoke in the hearth. The kitten purred in her lap. The last of the day came through the small window and lay in a long gold bar across the table between them, and across their 2 hands. They sat there like that for a long time. Neither of them counted the minutes. Neither of them needed to. Time was doing what time did in that small kitchen. It was slowing itself down, and stretching itself thin and making room for something that had not been there before, and would be there now for a very long time to come. At last she turned her hand under his, so that her fingers curled up into his palm. He closed his hand around hers. "Rowan," she said again, very soft. "Petra," he said. That was all. That was enough. Outside, the evening bird sang once more, and then was quiet. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the tea cooled in the cups, and a woman who had once been invisible sat with her hand in the hand of the man she had guarded on a market square, and neither of them said another word for a long, long while. The kitten, curled warm in her lap, slept on, unbothered by dukes. She thought, without meaning to, that this was the whole of it. This was what her mother had meant, all those years ago in the winter bedroom, about servants and animals and quiet kindness. This was what a life was made of. Not balls, not carriages, not silk. Only this. 1 cup of tea, 1 warm hand, 1 small cat, 1 mended stone, 1 small evening bird singing outside the window of a cottage at the end of a lane in a small market town, where once a woman in a grey cloak had sat on a church step for 4 hours over a sleeping stranger, because no one else would, and because it was the true thing to do. She lifted her cup with her free hand. She drank. He did the same. The tea was strong and hot. It tasted of the water from her own well and the leaves he had brought her that afternoon in a small paper twist, along with the horse and the trimmed hair and the plain dark coat. It tasted of her kitchen and of his coming. Somewhere out beyond the ridge road, the bells of Wren's Hollow began to ring the evening hour. They rang steady and clear, all 6 of them, one after another, and then the deep one, 6 times over. She counted them. He counted them too. She could tell by the small movement of his hand on hers with each stroke. When the last one died away, and the small kitchen was quiet again except for the fire and the kitten, she looked up at him, and she smiled. Small, Rowan, yes, you may come again. I will. Often. Yes, every week if you like. Every week. And we will see what grows. Yes, he said, we will see what grows. She squeezed his hand once. He squeezed hers back. Then she stood up, because the kettle needed to be moved off the hook so the fire would not die, and because the kitten needed to be shifted onto the settle, and because tea did not pour itself twice. He watched her move about the kitchen. He watched the way she did things. He watched the way she was, when no one important was looking. Except that now, of course, someone was. And she knew it. And she did not change. That, more than anything else in the whole of the long story, was what he loved her for. He would come to know it, over the years and the years. He would come to say it, on a small stone bench in a garden at Thornwick, on an afternoon in her 30th year, when the sun was low and the roses were open, and their oldest child was calling something from across the lawn. He would say it plain, without adornment, in the way he had learned from her, that first spring, in a small kitchen at the end of Miller's Lane. You did not change, he would say. That is the whole of it. You did not change. And she would smile, and she would look at him with the same steady look she had given him on the church step, and in her kitchen, and at her table, and she would say only, quiet, no. Why would I? But that was all still to come. For now, on this evening, in this small stone cottage. She was only pouring a second cup of tea for a man who had been a beggar 4 weeks ago on a market square, and he was only sitting in her father's chair, with his hat on her table, and his hand still warm on the wood where hers had rested. The fire crackled. The kitten sighed. The last light left the window. She lit a candle. He watched her light it. And in the small yellow glow of that one candle, in the small warm room of that one small cottage, at the end of that one small lane, in that one small market town, the whole of the world felt, for one long moment, like exactly the right size. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.